Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. On this episode, I'm really excited to host my friend Ryan Hawk. Ryan is the founder and host of the Learning Leaders Show, a leadership podcast with millions of listeners in more than 150 countries. Ryan is an author, having written 3 books, Welcome to Management, The Pursuit of Excellence, and then his newest book is The Score That Matters, which is an instant USA Today national bestseller. Ryan is a keynote speaker on leadership-related topics. He's spoken at hundreds of conferences, sales meetings, etc. Ryan's also put together something really interesting called Leadership Circles, where he brings together leaders to have conversation about their own growth and development. But significantly, and what I want to tap into in this episode, is the Learning Leaders Show now has over 600 episodes. These are 600 leaders that Ryan has had a deep form conversation with. And through that, he has learned a ton about leadership. And so today, Ryan is here to share with us some insights about leadership, but then more specifically, some insights about the intersection of leadership and negotiation, as he helps us think about how we can make negotiation more simple as leaders of our organizations, our teams, and our companies. Let's jump into this conversation with Ryan Hawk, the host of the Learning Leaders Show. Ryan, great to have you on the Negotiation Made Simple podcast. I'm so pumped about this conversation. I remember, and you can tell me which episode if you remember. I don't know if you do, but I remember about 7 or 8 years ago, you called me and said, hey, John, I'd love you to be part of this new podcast I'm doing. And I think it was like less than 10 episodes when I was on or something. I mean, it was brand new and you had this vision for this thing and it was so exciting. And I was honored to be a part of it. And I think you had a bunch of like NFL quarterbacks that were around. I was like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing in this company. But now here you are. The host of the Learning Leader podcast, now almost 600 episodes, one of the top leadership podcasts in the world. Tell us a little bit about what is the mission of the Learning Leader Show and what is it that you're trying to accomplish and how is it that you're trying to serve leaders with the show?
Well, first, John, you were episode 12, which is insane. Wow. Now we have 6. I just released my 611th episode last night. So that's wild that you were 600. It's been 600 episodes. It's been almost a decade.
It's amazing.
The Learning Leader Show started for me as a way. So I had gone back to school when I had a full-time job working in sales at LexisNexis, where we first met, where you taught us.
That's right.
You led the best training still to this day that I've ever been through. The negotiation training that you lead is the best of the best. It's the most enjoyable and the most effective. So anyway, I had gotten promoted to a leadership role and I had gotten my MBA. It took me 6 years to get my MBA. I used tuition reimbursement from Lexis to pay one class at a time so that I wouldn't have to get too much out of my own pocket for that. I didn't have as much money then. And I finished and I thought, well, this would be a waste not to continue using the company's tuition reimbursement. So let me go back to school and get another degree, maybe a PhD. I want to learn more about leadership. But as I was applying and looking at programs, I did not love the curriculum. In fact, I wanted it to be more personal to me. I wanted it to be more interesting. In fact, I wanted to choose my own professors. So I thought, what if instead I could literally choose my own professors and I could have one-on-one conversations with them. I'll record them in the form of a podcast because I'd done lots of interviews at the time when I was hiring for sales roles as a leader, both for my team and other teams. And I listened to podcasts, even though those were the early days. I had been a listener and really loved the medium. I love long form conversations to where you can really go deep with somebody. Mm-hmm. And so the Learning Leader Show, the reason it's called that is because it was really my leadership personal PhD program for myself, first and foremost. But I thought it would increase the odds of people responding to talk to me if I said it was for a podcast instead of just, can I call you, right? Because calling people like you and others really well-known experts in their fields, And it's not always easy to get a yes. And so I thought I would increase my odds a little bit if it was a podcast. And this was a kind of a pipe dream. I was hopeful that others would want to learn along with me. And so that's what, kind of what ended up happening is building this learning leader community of listeners, which then allowed me to leave corporate America at the end of 2017 and do this stuff full time. So that's like the shortest possible version of what this thing is all about and how it got started.
Well, I love the intentionality of that in terms of how you wanted to invest in yourself, came up with a really creative way. And then in doing that, found a way to kind of bless others with that as well. I want to come back to that in just a second, but you mentioned kind of your corporate career and eventually making the transition, which I'm eager to hear more about. But what were some of those early lessons or early challenges that you remember when you got promoted into that leadership position at LexisNexis, and now all of a sudden you're facing the leadership challenge that you help people with these days?
The weird thing about promotions for the most part, and probably all jobs or most jobs, is you get really good at one specific thing. In this case, it was selling, a telephonic sales role. And then you get promoted to do something, which is lead that team. And you've only developed, in some cases, a tiny fraction of the skills to get good at the job you get promoted to. This is where the Peter principle comes into effect, which is we all get promoted to our level of incompetence. And a lot of us, that's like the first promotion, right? Like we're really good as sales reps. We know how to do that well, but we're not great at teaching and leading others to do what we did, as well as manage a team, which is what that frontline manager role is. There's so much more to it. And so I struggled in so many ways of the only thing I was probably like decent at was spotting talent, which is very helpful. I felt like some of that translated from my sports playing days of trying to understand early who had high potential and high ceilings to be good. Outside of that, I struggled at the day-to-day management. I struggled at the consistency of one-on-ones. I struggled at team meetings. I struggled at working across boundaries and with other parts of the organization. I was pretty full of myself, I would say, and into my own work, and thought had a very high opinion of how good I was because I hadn't been humbled enough yet. I was still pretty young. I was 26 when I got promoted. And so, I was bad at most parts of the job of being a frontline manager when I got promoted. I mean, my first book, Welcome to Management, is basically written about all of the mistakes I made and then learned from both my own experience as well as the people that I've spoken to on my podcast. And so that's still my best-selling book and the one that does the best because it's about a time in a lot of people's careers that they struggle so much, is that making that initial leap from individual contributor to first-time manager. And most of us screw up a lot of it before we get better. Very few people are just good at that naturally because none of us have really done it before. Like even leading a football team as a quarterback is dramatically different than leading a sales team when it comes within a Fortune 500 or a corporate America type job. So it was just a really tough transition. And unfortunately, the people who worked for me had to deal with a lot of the mistakes that I made and learning on the fly as we went. And fortunately, it got better, but it took years before I was in a position where I would say I was probably a decent to good manager.
Well, and your story is like the story of so many people. To where they do get promoted into that place of incompetence. They struggle, and they don't really know why, because everything else in life they've been able to find success with, and now all of a sudden it's a totally different experience. And I think others probably are not as intentional as you were in terms of trying to develop through it. And so as a result, they'll go a different direction. It won't work out, whatever the case might be. But as you think about that journey and you think about, what you did to try to develop through it in terms of starting the podcast, share with us some things about leadership that you have learned that the podcast has taught you as you've listened to now 600 voices share with you insights about leadership.
I think one of the things, my dad, who's been a frequent guest and is still my number one mentor in life, he told me as I got promoted, hey, look, you're going to be pulled in 19 different directions every day to go to this meeting and that meeting and to be a part of this committee and that group. And what he had seen and what others that I had spoken to had seen had happened to first-time managers especially, is that they end up being just in meetings all the time with their door closed, or even not in the office, but somebody else's office because they're in some other meeting that somebody asked them to go to. And he said, remember, the number one job for you is to be with your people. Be with them as much as humanly possible. Sit in their cubicles, have one-on-ones, give them prescriptive coaching as well as long-term developmental coaching. And you'll never go wrong if you err on the side of being with your people. Sure. And he was right, because I got pulled in so many directions that I actually did not listen initially to that really useful advice. And I wasn't with my team enough. And I think that's just something that people have to figure out, is how can you be with them as much as possible. I learned this also from General Stanley McChrystal, four-star general, who at that point, when you raise that level, you're not on the front lines, you're not out with the troops, but he went against those norms and would spend regular amounts of time, even though it was dangerous, on the front lines with the people, because he wanted to get a feel and an understanding of what is actually happening, not after it goes through multiple layers of phone or of like phone tag, right? Where it gets tweaked a little bit and a little bit more. And by the time it gets to the four-star general, it's not even close to the truth. And so I think that's this frontline obsession, this being with your people, I think as a manager at any level is really important, but it's really easy to forget about that because there's a lot of other stuff, meetings and people that are going to want your time and managing up type stuff that's going to happen that you don't realize that that's part of the job when you're an individual contributor, right? Because as an individual contributor, you're only worried about yourself and your own goal and your own job. But when you become a manager, all of a sudden, like, everyone feels like they're going to pull you into everything, and you feel like, oh, I got to go to everything. And before you know it, you haven't spent as much time with your people on the front lines. And I think that's ends up what probably is the most important part of the job.
Yeah. And being a leader, you get stretched in so many ways, and you find yourself, at least I have in my experiences, to where, you don't get to do what you're really passionate about doing. You have to do all these other things, and you have to become passionate about these other things, because that's really the job in terms of making it successful. But I want to go back to, you mentioned your dad. I've had the opportunity to work with your dad and get to know your dad a little bit. And as I think about your dad, I think about something that Bill Haslam, former governor of Tennessee, said to me one time. He was at one of the retirement parties for my dad, and he leaned over to me and he said, you and I share something in common. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, we both hit the jackpot in dads. And he says, you have a great dad. I had a great dad. And he says, that makes a big difference. And so I'd pass that on to you, and that, you and I both hit the jackpot in dads in terms of having dads as mentors. Now, we're really blessed to have incredible dads as mentors and to be able to work with them. Not everyone shares that. But talk a little bit about the importance of having someone in your life that is a mentor, that can speak truth to you, that can help you develop, someone that no matter what, like, they're in your corner and they want you to succeed even kind of more than them. Talk a little bit about, from a leadership standpoint, the importance of having great mentors and great voices in your life.
Yeah, it's another thing my dad did, and I bet your dad was good at this as well, is he would even make introductions for me to other people probably around his age, colleagues that he worked with, and help me build relationships with them. So it wasn't even beyond him. It was the people in his network became in my network, and they still are to this day. Rex Caswell, sure. Tom Ogburn, Rick Nightenbach, the Gaffney brothers. Like, I think of all these guys that are my dad's best friends that are around his age, that they're still pouring into me because they love him, and thus they love me too. And so that's another benefit of winning the dad lottery, as you have and as I have. That's But if you don't have that, I think one of the key parts of building a great life, building a great career, is finding a way to build deep, meaningful relationships with people who have done what you want to do, but more importantly, they've done it in a way in which you deeply admire. And so they have the high character and integrity of the type of person, and they've done maybe something that you'd like to do. And so people ask, like, well, how can you do that? I don't have anything to give. And I think you'd be surprised. A lot of these good guys, they love giving back. I think they love paying it forward, the good people. And so reaching out to them with genuine curiosity, asking them questions. I think there are two different ways to like reach out that you probably get all the time now, and that I get too now that we're advancing in our careers. One email or text or whatever will say, "Hey, John, I love to pick your brain. Can we talk?" Okay. And that's the bad way to ask. The other way to ask would be like, "Hey, John, on page 74, Negotiation Made Simple, you said this specific thing. I love to talk to you about this specific element of negotiation. Can we talk?" Now, think about the two differences in that ask. One is very specific. One helps you know exactly what they want to talk about. The other one is very broad. You don't really know where you're going to go. And so I would tell people, if you're going to reach out to someone who's far ahead of you, that you admire, that you look up to, like a John Lowry, I would say specificity is key. Be specific in your praise and specific in your ask. Give John Lowry a chance to have an understanding of what you're going for, and help him prepare to be as good as he can possibly be when you do actually have the call, or you meet for coffee or for a lunch. And so anyway, I know I got a little bit ahead of myself, but I think it's important that people get some actual like takeaways that you could implement immediately as soon as you get done listening to this, to say, oh, there are a few people I want to reach out to. Maybe I shouldn't have asked to pick their brain. I should get more specific, and that will increase my odds of them saying yes. And then once you do have that meeting, let's say with a mentor, follow up, right? Write them a thank you note. Say, here's specifically what I learned. Here's what I'm going to implement based on our conversations. And then, hopefully you set up the next meeting as well. And then you just do that with lots of people. Like, that's what I started doing earlier in my career, in addition to the podcast, was just trying to meet with people who were far wiser than me, be grateful, follow up, and then be very specific in the ask. And that's how I think I've built a pretty good mentor board of advisors. My personal MBA, right, is my mentor board of advisors is very helpful. And I can go to them, and different ones based on what the problem or the question is, different ones. And they seem to be rooting for me. And I don't know about you, man, but I want to have as many people rooting for me as possible. And so I have to do the necessary work to create those deep relationships with people. And that's a never ending thing, because I think a good life is built upon great mutually beneficial relationships, and mentors play a big part of that.
Yeah, I love the specificity insight that you shared right there. I mean, that's so practical, so useful for people. And then the other thing you've said that's so powerful too is that, really go for people that you have admiration for, and, people that you respect. And I think for a lot of people, they'd be surprised if they approach it the right way, as you just taught them. Most people have what I call kind of a teacher or a mentor within. Like, they want to be helpful. They want to pour into other people's lives. There's great meaning, there's great purpose in that, and people want to tap into that. And what's interesting, and I'll share this one story, is that, many times people assume that this is, it's younger people that would do this with older people, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I remember a moment where I founded this innovation center here in Nashville, and Tim Corbin, the head baseball coach at Vanderbilt, probably one of the top baseball coaches in the country, won a national championship a couple of years ago. So he's in this space, and he has this picture of this old basketball coach, a legendary basketball coach named Don Meyer, that coached at Lipscomb University, coached in South Dakota. And I just asked him because I was so surprised and having some connections with Lipscomb, it kind of took me off guard. And I said, Coach Coburn, you got Coach Meyer on your screensaver of your computer. I was like, what's up with that? And he says, next to my father, he's one of the most influential people in my life. And I was like, how on earth did that happen? And he said, the first year I came to Vanderbilt, we went from worst to first in the SEC. And he says, I'm sitting in my office one day and I get this call from this old guy with this crotchety old voice. And he was like, Coach, Don Meyer over here at Lipscomb University. He's a basketball coach. He's not even a baseball coach. He's like, you went from worst to first. Tell me how you did it. I want to know everything you did. And here was a very senior level legendary coach that's reaching out to a much younger coach who had just done something remarkable, saying, teach me how to do it. And I love that example because it reflects this idea of kind of lifelong learning and putting your ego aside to create space to have people pour into you to help you develop as a leader.
Dude, that's awesome. That's like, those are my favorite people. Because they are humble enough to realize that there's so much more out there, regardless of age. But you see that, and I love the curiosity from Don Meyer too. Like, it feels so genuine that he was like, "Wait a second, worst to first. I need to know how. I need to know how. Like, I need to figure out how he did that. I'm just going to call him and ask him." Like, I love people like he wasn't even thinking of an ego or being a humble person. I'm guessing, I don't know him. I'm guessing it was out of a genuine curiosity to learn. That's like,
I think so.
That's what a learning leader is to me. Like, my favorite learning leaders to me are those that they, regardless of anything going on, like, they follow their genuine curiosity and obsessions with great rigor. They'll ask questions. They'll pick up the phone. There's so much to learn, especially, John, now from guys younger than us, people younger than us, of the way kind of the world is working with the internet, with social, with podcasts, with all this stuff. I have like a little stable of some of the guys younger than me. In fact, I'm going to go see a couple of them in New York in a few weeks of, like, I just need to talk to you about how you view the world, about some of the stuff I've seen you publish online. Like, I think it's really useful to have people of all ages. Like, when I do talks, I'll do this kind of who is your who bit. And there's 3 buckets. That's ahead, beside, and behind. And I think it's important to have people in all 3 of those buckets. People who are ahead of you, right? They've accomplished things you want to accomplish and you admire how they did it. People beside you, like, we're on similar paths, going in a similar direction, no judgment zone. We're rooting for each other. Let's talk through it. And then people behind you, people that you're teaching, people that you're helping, as well as learning from, because they view the world a little bit differently. I think having people in all 3 of those buckets is super useful as you're building out kind of like your stable of people in your life.
I love that. I love those buckets. So let's transition a little bit and think about negotiation. Negotiation, a really important leadership skill. I define negotiation as a strategic communication process to get a deal or to solve a problem. And when I ask leaders about how much or what percentage of their professional time they spend engaged in this process, they'll be like, are you kidding me? This is 90% of my time. This is 80%. Like, this is what I do, is I spend all day, every day thinking about how I'm going to communicate to either put a deal together or to solve a problem. And so as we think about the intersection of leadership and negotiation, what thoughts do you have, or what ideas do you have for people as they're seeking to negotiate through the leadership challenge on a daily basis?
I think, and I say this outright, I try to like kind of lay all the cards on the table as it relates to negotiation. The number one thing for me is that I'm playing the long game. And so I think of every single deal, every single problem, every single relationship as if we're going to work together for a really long time. And in order for that to happen, that doesn't mean I try to win the deals. If anything, I would rather leave a little bit so that they win first and then I win second. Hopefully we both win, whether this is a price thing or whether it's a service thing or whatever it is. I always want the people I'm working with to feel like they're getting an amazing deal. That whatever they're getting in return for what, whether they're paying me or whether we're working together, that it's an amazing partnership, that they are, it's certainly got to be a win for them. So I have a few people on my team I work with. I want them to feel like they are overpaid and that the work they're doing lights them up. So it's not just with the money, it's also with, like, I'm not going to dump the stuff that I don't want to do on them. I want them within their areas of genius, stuff that lights them up, and to say, I can't believe I get paid this much to do this type of work. So that's like with people on my team for a keynote speech, right? You're doing the same things. They need to feel like whatever it is that I charge, they're getting, I don't know, I would hope 10x the value of that based on the impact I'm making for the people in those seats, right? Whether we're working longer term with leaders, it needs to be a transformational impact on those people. So whatever they're paying seems like a huge win. If you want to like play long-term games and have long-term relationships, I think you have to think about those like transformational impacts you make on all of the people that you're negotiating with at all times. And, you know, it doesn't work out all the time. I wish it did, but it doesn't work out all the time. But I want it to work out as much as possible to where the people I'm working with think, man, I can't believe that I get to do it this way. Or I can't believe that this is what I'm getting paid for. Or this is what we paid and this is what we got. Like, I just want the other person to feel like they are winning all the time. Like Warren Buffett said, he always tried to leave a little bit on the table, right? Like when he was doing deals. I think that's a great maxim for it. Like, let's always leave a little bit or sometimes a lot if you're playing the long game, versus like some people feel like they need to win a negotiation. I think those people are more transactional, and their life can become a series of short-term transactions where, yes, they may win or get the better end of the deal. But to me, like, that's not as enjoyable as trying to have long-term relationships, transformational type relationships. And if you're doing that, then I think you got to almost first look for how the other person can win first, and then hopefully I can win too. And in that way, we have a chance to like really do work together for a really long time.
Yeah, so you're tapping into something really, really powerful there in terms of recognizing that the way that someone generates satisfaction in terms of who they're working with or the deal that they're working on, it has to do with their feeling and how they feel about themselves. It's the number one biggest factor without a doubt. And so the idea of leaving a little bit so the other side can feel like they got to win, or making them feel like they got tremendous value for whatever they invested.
And genuinely get a win, though, not just feel like it. I want them to genuinely get a win. Yeah.
And so, and in doing that, you know, that feeling that you create, what's interesting in the negotiation world is that the reality is also sometimes perception, to where, you know, you don't necessarily have to give them all of the value in a deal to get them to a place to where they feel like they're getting great value in the deal. And that's the interesting thing about this negotiation piece is if you treat people really, really well, the way that they look at the economics of something will actually change a bit, because they feel like, oh, this is relational. Yeah, I'm going to give a little bit here. They're going to give a little bit here. And at the end of the day, this is going to work out for us. And those people and those dynamics, when you're able to create those are the people that always come back for more. Whenever the need arises again, they're coming back again. And you're right. The folks that want to try to squeeze all of the value, those are the folks that have a hard time winning the next deal because people remember how they feel and they didn't feel good. And so they're not coming back. And so I love that idea in terms of recognizing that there is, as I call it, kind of the human element that never leaves, whether it's in leadership or in negotiation. And both as a negotiator, but also as a leader, you know, at the end of the day, it's how do people that you're working with feel about themselves, which is an interesting analysis to do as you're managing a person or as you're managing a process or as you're managing a negotiation.
Yeah. And people talk, right? They talk to each other, especially in industries where we work. And for example, like I run these like leadership circles, John, and they're paid mastermind groups. And and let's say I have someone who's in there, like $12,500 a year. So it's not like a cheap thing. It's a real investment for each of these members. And I will tell them, you can talk to any single person who has ever been a member of a leadership circle in the past 8 years. Any of them. I'm not going to I don't want to hand select the best of the best that I know will give me a great, right? Like talk to any of them and you tell me, and I'll even send a list and I'll double check with them to make sure they're okay with talking, but all of them are. And then let the person pick at random if they want to talk to somebody. And I think that's like important too, is that they will remember the value they got from something. They will remember how you made them feel, and they can be either your best advocates or your worst. It's all about how you treated them, how you make them feel, and the value that you provided to them. And I think that's a more enjoyable way to go about doing business, is that I try to intentionally think about that before every single leadership circle meeting, before our in-person growth summit that we have every year in May. Like all of the stuff that we do, I want to be super thoughtful and intentional about that, knowing that those people, the people I'm working with, can and will be the best advocates for the future of my business too. And so if you treat them right and you provide them with the value that they deserve, your business is probably going to grow. Like good things are probably going to happen to you, but I think you do have to be very thoughtful and intentional about that basically every single day. And if not, that's how I think businesses can go in the wrong direction.
So let me add a wrinkle to this, because I think this is real life. And, leadership requires people to do hard things. You got to make hard decisions. You got to make moves that aren't popular. You have to make decisions that, frankly, at times will negatively impact people. And that's part of the leader's role, is to be looking out for the whole and protecting kind of the mission of the organization or the business or whatever it might be. And so in doing that, there's a balance that has to happen between kind of the empathy that we just talked about, and then also the assertiveness that you have to have at times as a leader as well. What have you learned over the years, and what have you seen in terms of the best leaders, in terms of how they balance assertiveness and empathy to be able to accomplish what they need to accomplish, but do so in a way that honors and protects people as best they can?
Yeah, it's a tough one. One of the companies I work with is called Insight Global out of Atlanta, Georgia. They're all over the world now, but they have a shared value that states always know where you stand. And I think I really like that value in a person. My mom is an always know where you stand type person, so I've had that in my life. However, when I became a new manager, this is something I was very bad at. I wanted to be liked and respected. I wanted both of those things, which is hard. I think my dad is one of those people who's both liked and respected. Sometimes people are one or the other or neither. Yeah. But I erred too much on the liked side, right? And so you do things where you don't share bad news, or you don't tell somebody they don't want to hear, or you don't put someone on a performance plan, or you don't fire someone when they should be fired. And so I think from a leadership perspective, we shouldn't do the once or twice a year performance reviews. We should do the daily, hourly, minute by minute performance reviews. Meaning, like one of my friends who works with me, a coach now named Garen Stokes, who's on my team. Garen's big thing is see it, say it, see it, say it. And so if you see somebody performing at a high level and doing an amazing job, tell them, right? However, if you see somebody not performing up to our standards, not doing it the way they should be doing it, not doing it in a high character way, whatever are the values that we've agreed upon, the expectations we've agreed upon, see it, say it. You got to tell them immediately. Yeah. One of my mentors that, again, my dad introduced me to earlier in my life, a former military guy who was this amazing sales leader. You probably worked with him at LexisNexis. His name is Jeff Weaver. Weaver came to me and he said, "Hey, man, bad news doesn't get better with age." And I was like, man, I've let a lot of this bad news age,
Build
hoping
up. Yep.
it would magically go away. And it never, ever, ever goes away. Don't let bad news get old. Just say it. Just tell them.
Yeah.
And that is much easier said than done. But I think if you create a culture that's see it, say it, that is this daily feedback style, you have a better chance than if you're like waiting to the once a year performance review and you get a 1 through 5 rating and they think they're a 1, which is the best. And you're like, you're a 3.5. And then they go bananas because you haven't said anything to them all year. So it's like, I think it's creating a culture and creating the habit of getting and giving regular feedback and make that like embedded within your place of work, or at least within your team, so that people understand that that's just part of how you're going to go about doing your work. I think people will grow to like it, even when they're getting negative feedback. And when I think about my favorite bosses, the ones who were most effective and who I respected the most and grew to like the most, that they were willing and able to give me feedback on a regular basis, both when I was doing a good job and when I was doing a bad job. And ultimately, we all, I think, for the most part, want to get better. But it's hard to get better if you're not getting the real, raw, honest feedback from a leader to tell you when maybe you've messed up or when you weren't doing it the right way. And if we're honest with ourselves and we know that the person cares about us and they care about us getting better, then it might sting initially getting that feedback, but ultimately it's what's better for us. And as leaders, that's what's better for the people that we're leading to. So we should aim to do that. It's hard, but I think once you get that as part of the embedded element of the culture, we're all better off for it. And we all probably like it better, even if there are moments that it stings in the short term.
And you've just made the case for why it's so important as a leader to really invest in your negotiation skills, because negotiation is how you work through conflict. And when you provide open feedback to people, there are moments where it can create conflict. And if you don't have the confidence to be able to work through that conflict, then you're going to avoid it. And by avoiding it, that goes back to your bad news doesn't get better with age. And avoiding it's the most comfortable, which is why people resort to that, but it's not the most productive and it's not the most healthy. And so building confidence in your negotiation skills, you have the confidence to say, I can create a little conflict here and we're going to get through it. Because I know how to lead the conversation. I know how to lead a process, a strategic process that can get us to the other side of this, to where we are better, and we're better for having gone through this. So last thing in terms of thinking about kind of leadership and negotiation is our world's becoming very diverse, and not just diverse in terms of culturally or racially, but it's also very, very diverse in terms of the generational aspects that exist in the workplace, people's personalities, how people react to different things and different leadership styles and things like that. What are you seeing or hearing right now in terms of how to work with, how to negotiate with all of the diversity that exists in terms of people coming together in a workplace, and how it is that people can negotiate through that and manage that most effectively?
I think one of the biggest changes I've seen, and I think this is a good thing, growing up, especially as an athlete, I didn't really need to understand why we did what we did. If my coach or teacher said to do something, I just did it blindly, didn't really ask questions. That's been, I feel like, the biggest shift is coaches and teachers and leaders need to explain the why behind what we're doing. People want to work for a company that has a distinct purpose beyond just them getting a paycheck. People want to know why they're doing what they're doing. And I don't know if this is just young people. This seems like this is just a change. Maybe it started with younger people, but it's kind of grown to most people now, where they want to know why we're doing this thing in practice. They want to know why we're focusing on this training in a meeting. They want to know why our company is shifting its strategy to, do something different. And so as leaders, it's not a bad thing for us to know the why behind what we're doing. I think it'll make us clearer and sharper thinkers to fully think about that prior to communicating this change and direction to a team. Wait, why are we doing this? Right? Think about that write about that, and then be prepared to communicate that. So I feel like that's one of the biggest changes that's happened maybe over the past decade plus, is that the days of people just blindly, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, I don't think that happens as much anymore. And so that forces leaders to have a clear understanding of the why behind what we're doing, and then be able to effectively communicate that to the people on their team so that they're like, okay, I can get behind this, and then we go. But I don't know about you if you feel that way, but that's what I've noticed as one of the biggest changes. And I think in a way that could make leaders even better than they were before, is that more people are asking why.
I think it's a great thought. And I think it does make leaders better in terms of they have to work it out themselves to have a pretty compelling why before they just go ask people to do this or set this goal or whatever the case might be. And that will strengthen the depth of their leadership. But what it also does then is it also creates this opportunity to ground that why into something that people value. And that's really, really important to do. And I found that to be an interesting thing, to where if the why is because we want to achieve this, sometimes that's not motivating. And people, they're not driven by whatever level of achievement you're trying to inspire them to reach. But if you ground it in why, well, because this is who we want to be, or these are the values on which we want to do work, now all of a sudden people can get behind that. And so the why does become really, really important. And lots of people talk about the why as just being a communication thing. I actually think it's a little deeper than that. I think you really have to ground the why in the right thing that is going to drive people. And if you do, there's nothing more motivational. If you don't, then yeah, it can be a real challenge. So, yep. Well, last couple of questions. This has been a great conversation. We could go forever on this, as we do when we get together and have coffee every now and then when I'm hanging out in Ohio. But last couple of questions real quick. As you look forward in terms of everything you're hearing on your podcast, as people are sharing with you their leadership insights, like what are the big global trends that you're seeing in leadership? Like if you had to identify a couple just trends in terms of how people are leading effectively today, what would you say?
I think there's, it's a big question that I probably need to think about a little bit more, but one of the biggest changes I feel like is we've shifted from a command and control style to more collaborative. And I think there are times actually when that isn't good, but there are a lot of times when it is. It's like a lot of things. The world is not black and white. It's super gray. It's nuanced. We're all on a spectrum. So at times when I've seen this go well is when leaders have surrounded themselves with really thoughtful and curious and intentional people, and they can have dialogue, talk through it, argue, and then come to a conclusion or make a decision. When it doesn't work is when you have a lot of people that have different priorities, that maybe are seeking for more self-interested things that aren't as bought into the betterment of the team. And then there's arguing for that. And then the leader, if they're not able to pull the trigger or make a decision, then that's when you might need a more of a command and control type. So it's like there's good and bad, but I feel like that's been a big shift where maybe a decade ago, there was much more of like, this is the leader. He or she is going to make the call. Yes, they'll talk to some people, but that's that. And then once they make the call, like it's I command and control. Now it feels like it's heading that there are teams that are becoming more collaborative. But that's a slippery slope. I think leaders have to be able to still make the call, be responsible for it, take ownership, but surround themselves with people that help them make the right decisions. But you can't let this paralysis by analysis happen. So I've worked with teams that have that going on, And sometimes it slows them down, but sometimes it can make them a lot stronger if the leader still has the ability to make the call after talking with their team. So that's probably one of the biggest changes. But that's a good question. That's something I would want to think about a little bit more as we've seen like what's changed and what's evolving as we move forward. I don't know. Is there something you've seen different with all the people you work with that from a leadership negotiation perspective that has changed either for the good or maybe not?
Well, I want to follow up on the collaboration comment because I think that's so interesting in terms of your recognition of that. And I, like you, have observed both the positives and the negatives of it. And in fact, there's a Stanford business professor that wrote a book called Collaboration. And in his research, he identifies that we at times have overvalued collaboration and employed it in moments where it wasn't right. It wasn't the best form of leadership to get something done in terms of trying to collaborate. And I think you nailed it in terms of your diagnosis. Collaboration is something that is very popular right now. It's a value that everyone kind of gets behind. And it's kind of becoming one of those words that's a bit overused, because what I do see a lot is people say, well, we need to collaborate. And the way in which we're going to collaborate, Ryan, is I'm going to lay out what we need to do. And you're going to say, okay, that sounds good. And that is collaboration. Well, that's not collaboration at all. Collaboration is actually far more complex. And for a leader, it's much more messy and it's much more difficult. And because of that, it slows things down dramatically. And so there's a university you may be familiar with called Southern New Hampshire University. And about 10 or 15 years ago, they hire this new president. And this is a regional school in New Hampshire. Okay. This is not like the most influential institution in America that's going to change higher education, right? And this president goes in and says, okay, like we got to start operating differently or we're not going to be around in a decade. And so he literally changes the entire framework of the school. And he starts this online program very early in the online education days. And, now it has, 100,000 students. It's a national player in the higher education space. But in hearing him speak about that, he said, I couldn't do it with collaboration. He's like, I never would have gotten the faculty to collaborate toward something that was so disruptive in terms of higher education. He says, what I had to do was I had to go over here and I had to completely start a new school with different faculty, different mission, different expectations, different everything. And then be able to show the traditional university the benefits that come when we generate millions upon millions of resources that can be invested back into the traditional program. And I always thought that was really interesting because, here's a moment where we value collaboration, but here was a leader that recognized he was not going to be able to collaborate to his vision and to success. And so he found a way in which it benefited all, but the path from A to Z wasn't a path of collaboration.
Interesting.
And in recognizing that, it's really, really important because the instinct to collaborate is a good one, but it needs to be reflected upon because you're right, leaders can get stuck to where we're trying to collaborate and we're getting nothing done. And it's a leader that kind of has to negotiate and push people through that.
Yeah, you've probably seen too of after Paul Graham published the essay called Founder Mode. Mm-hmm. He highlights like Brian Chesky at Airbnb, Frank Slootman, who I've had on my podcast from multiple companies, most recently Snowflake. These guys, now they are good at surrounding themselves with very capable, very intelligent, thoughtful people, but they are still in like founder mode, which is they're in the weeds. And they're making calls and they're making decisions and they're moving fast. And so in a way, it's almost bounced back a little bit where command and control, whoa. Well, let's be more collaborative. And then some saying, I need to go founder mode here. And so it's interesting to see how things come and go, how new kind of verbiage takes over in the world. And so people kind of jump on, but then they realize, wait a second. So again, it just shows like negotiation, like leadership, like life in general. It's super nuanced. It's situation by situation dependent. It's gray, and it's not just one or two. It's not black or white. It's usually a bit of gray is involved with a lot of this stuff.
And that's what makes leadership so interesting. It's constantly evolving. It's changing as people change, and it makes it fun for you and I to talk to people about it on a regular basis. So, Ryan, tell people, one of the things I admire about you is you've created this incredible community of leaders, whether it's around the podcast or the learning circles, all the different things that you've created. Tell people how to get involved in those things.
Yeah, the home base for all my stuff is learningleader.com. Books, podcasts, the leadership stuff that we do as a team, that I do as an individual, all of it's at learningleader.com. The name of the podcast is Learning Leader, so all of it's there. It's my life's work. It's stuff I'm most proud of, the things that I enjoy and feel super grateful that I get to have conversations like this on a daily basis with people far wiser than me. And I'm just trying to take the best of the best from each person that I learn, those who are sustaining excellence over time, and then share it with others, at least what's most useful. And the fact that this is a job and a way to provide for my family is something I'll like forever be grateful for. And I think that's why I try to work really hard at it.
Ryan, we're grateful for your time. Thanks for your insights. Thanks for being a part of Negotiation Made Simple, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks so much, John, man. Really appreciate it.
This episode has been a buffet of brilliance. Ryan has shared with us so many powerful ideas. They're super practical, they're easy to implement, and I'm confident that each thing he shared can make you a better leader. Specifically, I love the idea in terms of thinking about negotiation and creating the win for the other side. Taking this long view of negotiation and relationships and using this process to create long-term, sustainable, and profitable relationships. And doing that by letting the other side have some sense of victory. The wisdom in Ryan's thoughts there is really powerful as we think about negotiating with people with whom we're in very tight relationships and we want those relationships to continue. Ryan has shared with us some really practical advice. I also loved what Ryan said about reaching out to people and looking to connect with people. If you recall, he talked about being specific, asking for something very narrow, very specific. And in doing so, finding ways in which you can engage people, and then the importance of following up. All of that is really important in terms of creating opportunities to get to the table with someone, to be able to negotiate a deal, to be able to build a relationship or move something forward. So I hope you've benefited from this conversation as I have, and I hope you will take this and put it to work so that you become more effective, not only as a negotiator, but as a leader as well. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Negotiation Made Simple. Thanks for listening.